They forced down her Warthog over the Nevada desert, two F-16 Falcons bracketing the A-10 Thunderbolt, as ground control demanded she land immediately at the nearest airfield. Captain Linda Hayes had been flying an unauthorized mission, or so they thought, until the F-16 pilots got close enough to read the tail number on her aircraft. The moment they saw those faded digits painted on the weather metal, both pilots froze on their radios. That wasn't just any A-10 Warthog. It was tail number 78-0691, an aircraft that officially didn't exist anymore, flown by a pilot who was supposed to be dead. What happened next would shake the foundations of everything the Air Force thought it knew about one of the most classified missions in military history. Welcome to those who left a trace. Before we dive into this extraordinary story, tell us in the comments where in the world are you watching from today. And if you believe stories of legendary pilots deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button. You make this community what it is. The Nevada test and training range stretched across thousands of square miles of desert landscape, its restricted airspace serving as the primary training ground for most advanced military aircraft in the world. Nellis Air Force Base, located on the southern edge of this vast expanse of controlled airspace, was home to the Air Force's most elite pilot training programs, including the famous red flag exercises that brought together air crews from around the world to practice air combat tactics in realistic training scenarios. It was during one of these red flag exercises that the incident occurred on a Tuesday morning in March when the desert air was clear and the visibility was unlimited, perfect conditions for air-to-air combat training. The exercise involved over 60 aircraft from multiple branches of the military, conducting simulated combat operations that were designed to prepare pilots for the kind of complex, multi-threat environments they would encounter in actual warfare. Captain Michael Rodriguez was flying lead in a pair of F-16C Fighting Falcons that had been tasked with air superiority missions during the morning's training scenario. Rodriguez was an experienced pilot with over 2,000 flight hours in the F-16, and he had participated in red flag exercises multiple times. But he had never encountered a situation quite like what was about to unfold in the skies over Nevada. Viper lead, this is Nellis Control, came the voice of the air traffic controller managing the complex choreography of aircraft movements during the exercise. We have an unidentified aircraft entering restricted airspace from the northeast. Tail number Alpha 10 appears to be a Warthog, but it's not on today's flight manifest. Rodriguez looked to his left, where his wingman, Captain Sarah Mitchell, was maintaining perfect formation position in her own F-16. Both pilots had excellent visibility in the clear desert air, and they could easily see the distinctive silhouette of an A-10 Thunderbolt II, the legendary Warthog, approaching their training area from a direction that didn't correspond to any of the planned exercise scenarios. Nellis Control Viper lead, Rodriguez responded. I have visual contact with the Warthog. Aircraft appears to be flying straight and level, no apparent signs of distress. The A-10 Thunderbolt II was one of the most recognizable aircraft in the Air Force inventory, designed specifically for close air support ground forces, and built around a massive GU, 8 Avenger 30mm cannon, that gave the aircraft its distinctive nose-heavy appearance. The Warthog was beloved by ground troops for its ability to provide devastating fire support in close proximity to friendly forces, and was respected by pilots for its incredible durability and ability to survive battle damage that would destroy other aircraft. But this particular A-10 was flying alone, with no escort, no radio contact, and no authorization to be in a restricted airspace where some of the Air Force's most sensitive training operations were being conducted. Viper lead Nellis Control, the air traffic controller continued. The aircraft is not responding to radio calls on any frequency. You are directed to intercept and establish visual contact. Do not take any aggressive action until further notice. Rodriguez and Mitchell adjusted their flight path to intercept the A-10, using their superior speed to close the distance while maintaining safe separation. As they approached the slower-moving ground attack aircraft, Rodriguez began trying to establish radio contact on the international emergency frequency. Unidentified A-10. This is Air Force F-16, call sign Viper lead. You are flying in restricted airspace without authorization. Please respond on this frequency and follow my aircraft to Nellis Air Force Base for landing. There was no response from the A-10. The aircraft continued flying straight and level, maintaining a steady course and airspeed that suggested the pilot was either ignoring the radio calls or was unable to respond for some reason. As Rodriguez maneuvered his F-16 into a position alongside the A-10, he could see into the cockpit of the larger aircraft. The pilot was wearing standard flight gear, helmet, oxygen mask, and flight suit, but there was something about the way the pilot sat in the cockpit, the positioning of hands on controls, that suggested extensive experience with the aircraft. Nellis Control Viper lead, Rodriguez reported. I have visual contact with the A-10 pilot. Pilot appears alert and responsive, but aircraft is not responding to radio calls. Recommend directing aircraft to land at Nellis for identification and debriefing. Viper lead, Nellis Control. You are authorized to use standard intercept procedures to direct the aircraft to land. Use visual signals and maintain escort position until landing is complete. Rodriguez moved his F-16 into a position directly in front of the A-10, where the Warthog pilot could clearly see him, and began using hand signals and aircraft movements to indicate that the A-10 should follow him to Nellis Air Force Base. The universal aviation signals for "follow me" were clear and unambiguous, and any qualified pilot should have understood and complied with the instructions. But instead of following Rodriguez's aircraft toward Nellis, the A-10 began a gentle turn to the south, maintaining its original airspeed and altitude while heading toward a different part of the restricted airspace. Nellis Control Viper lead, Rodriguez reported with growing concern. The A-10 is not complying with directions to land. Aircraft is continuing on a southerly heading, requesting guidance on further action. Viper lead, this is Nellis Control. You're authorized to use more assertive intercept procedures. Position your aircraft to clearly indicate that compliance is mandatory. Do not fire warning shots or take any action that could be construed as hostile, but make it clear that the aircraft must land immediately. Rodriguez and Mitchell repositioned their F-16s to bracket the A-10, with Rodriguez on the left wing and Mitchell on the right. This formation made it clear to the Warthog pilot that the aircraft was being escorted by armed fighters and that compliance with landing instructions was not optional. It was at this point, as Rodriguez positioned his F-16 close enough to the A-10 to clearly read the aircraft's tail number, that everything changed. The tail number painted on the A-10's vertical stabilizer was 78-0691, and Rodriguez recognized it immediately. Every Air Force pilot knew that number, even though it was supposed to have been removed from service years ago. It was a tail number of the A-10 that had been flown during Operation Gothic Serpent in Somalia, the aircraft that had been involved in some of the most classified and controversial missions in recent Air Force history. Jesus Christ, Rodriguez muttered into his radio, forgetting proper communication protocols in his shock. Mitchell, are you reading that tail number? Captain Mitchell had also positioned her F-16 close enough to read the faded numbers painted on the A-10's fuselage, and her response reflected the same shock that Rodriguez was experiencing. Viper lead, I'm reading 78-0691. That's not possible. That aircraft was supposed to have been retired and placed in storage years ago. Rodriguez felt a chill run down his spine as he processed the implications of what he was seeing. Tail number 78-0691 was legendary in Air Force circles, but not for reasons that were discussed in official channels. That aircraft had been flown during some of the most dangerous and sensitive missions of the 1990s, including operations that were so classified that details remained sealed in Pentagon archives that only a handful of senior officers had access to. But more disturbing than the aircraft's identity was the question of who was flying it. The pilot of 78-0691 during its most famous missions had been Captain Linda Hayes, and according to official records, Captain Hayes had been killed in action during a classified mission in 1997. Her death had been classified at the highest levels, and the details of her final mission were known only to a select few members of the Air Force's most senior leadership. Nellis Control, Viper Lead. Rodriguez transmitted, his voice carrying a new level of urgency. We need to talk to someone with higher clearance level. The aircraft we're intercepting has historical significance that may require special handling procedures. There was a long pause before Nellis Control responded, and when the air traffic controller spoke again, his voice reflected confusion and concern. Viper Lead, Nellis Control. Can you clarify what you mean by historical significance? Rodriguez was facing a situation that had no precedent in his training or experience. He was being asked to force down an aircraft that was supposed to be in storage, being flown by a pilot who was supposed to be dead, in circumstances that touched on some of the most classified operations in Air Force history. Nellis Control, I need to speak to the senior officer on duty immediately. This situation requires classification levels that exceed normal communication channels. Within minutes, Rodriguez's radio crackled with a new voice, one that carried the authority of senior command and the weight of years of experience with the kind of sensitive situations that most pilots never encountered. Viper Lead, this is Colonel Patterson, Nellis Base Commander. I'm monitoring your situation. Can you provide details about the aircraft you're intercepting? Rodriguez took a deep breath before responding, knowing that what he was about to report would trigger responses at the highest levels of Air Force Command. Colonel, the aircraft we're intercepting is an A-10 Thunderbolt, tail number 78-0691. The aircraft is not responding to radio calls, but appears to be under positive control by a qualified pilot. There was a long silence on the radio before Colonel Patterson responded, and when he did, his voice carried a different quality, one that suggested he understood the full implications of what Rodriguez was reporting. Viper Lead, maintain visual contact with the aircraft, but do not take any action to force landing until I give you specific instructions. This situation requires consultation with higher authority. Rodriguez exchanged glances with Mitchell, both pilots recognizing that they had stumbled into something far more complex and sensitive than a routine intercept of an unauthorized aircraft. As they continued to escort the A-10 to the Nevada desert, Rodriguez found himself studying the pilot in the Warthog's cockpit with growing fascination and concern. There was something about the way the pilot handled the aircraft, the smooth, confident control inputs, the professional precision of flight path management, that suggested extensive experience with the A-10 and its systems. But there was also something else, something that Rodriguez couldn't quite identify, but that suggested this wasn't just any qualified A-10 pilot. The way the aircraft was being flown demonstrated a level of mastery that came only from years of combat experience and thousands of hours of flight time in high-stress environments. Mitchell, Rodriguez called his wingman, are you noticing anything unusual about how that Warthog is being flown? Captain Mitchell had been conducting her own assessment of the A-10's flight characteristics, and her response confirmed Rodriguez's observations. Viper Lead, the pilot is flying that aircraft like it's an extension of their body. That's not normal proficiency. That's combat veteran level expertise. Rodriguez was beginning to understand that they weren't just dealing with an unauthorized flight by a qualified pilot. They were observing flying skills that suggested the pilot had extensive combat experience in the A-10, the kind of experience that was only developed through years of dangerous missions in hostile environments. But according to official records, the most experienced A-10 combat pilots from the aircraft's most active periods were either retired, assigned to other aircraft, or, in the case of Captain Linda Hayes, killed in action during classified missions. Nellis Control, Viper Lead, Rodriguez transmitted, the pilot we're observing is demonstrating flight characteristics consistent with extensive A-10 combat experience. This may be relevant to the classification issues we discuss. Colonel Patterson's response came immediately, and it carried a new level of urgency that confirmed Rodriguez's suspicions about the sensitivity of the situation. Viper Lead, continue escort, but maintain safe distance. Do not attempt to force landing until I receive guidance from higher authority. This situation has implications that extend beyond normal base security protocols. As the three aircraft continued flying to the Nevada desert, Rodriguez began to notice that the A-10 was following a specific flight path that seemed purposeful rather than random. The aircraft was heading toward a particular area of the restricted airspace that Rodriguez recognized as being associated with some of the most classified training activities conducted at the Nevada Test and Training Range. Mitchell, Rodriguez called his wingman, that Warthog is heading toward the Groom Lake area. That's restricted airspace that requires special clearances even for base personnel. Captain Mitchell was also tracking the A-10's flight path, and her response reflected growing concern about the implications of the aircraft's destination. Viper lead. If that aircraft is heading toward Groom Lake without proper clearances, we may be looking at a security breach that exceeds anything we're qualified to handle. Rodriguez was beginning to understand that the situation was escalating beyond a simple intercept of an unauthorized aircraft into something that touched on the most sensitive and classified operations conducted by the U.S. Air Force. Groom Lake, also known as Area 51, was a location of the Air Force's most classified aircraft testing and development programs. Access to the airspace around Groom Lake required security clearances that were among the highest in the military, and unauthorized penetration of that airspace was considered a serious breach of national security. Nellis Control Viper Lead. Rodriguez transmitted with growing urgency. The aircraft we're escorting is on a direct heading for Groom Lake restricted airspace. This situation may require immediate action to prevent unauthorized access to classified facilities. Colonel Patterson's response was immediate and carried the authority of someone who was coordinating with the highest levels of military command. Viper Lead, you're ordered to prevent the aircraft from entering Groom Lake airspace by any means necessary. Use visual signals, radio calls, and if necessary, warning shots to divert the aircraft to an approved landing site. Rodriguez felt his pulse quicken as he processed the authorization to use warning shots, a level of force that was only authorized in the most serious security situations. He was being ordered to potentially fire on an American aircraft flown by what appeared to be a qualified Air Force pilot, in circumstances that remained completely unclear. Nellis Control Viper Lead. Confirm authorization for warning shots against American aircraft. Viper Lead. Authorization confirmed. The security of classified facilities takes precedence over all other considerations. Prevent unauthorized access by any means necessary. Rodriguez positioned his F-16 directly in front of the A-10 and began using aggressive visual signals to indicate that the aircraft must turn away from its current heading. He rocked his wings, performed sharp turns, and positioned his aircraft in ways that clearly communicated the urgency of the situation. But instead of turning away from the restricted airspace, the A-10 pilot did something that shocked both F-16 pilots and would later be described in classified reports as demonstrating knowledge and capabilities that should have been impossible. The A-10 suddenly performed a series of maneuvers that were not in any training manual Rodriguez had ever seen. The aircraft dropped to extremely low altitude, used terrain features to mask its approach to the restricted airspace, and demonstrated tactical flying techniques that were characteristic of combat operations rather than routine flight. What the hell? Rodriguez said over the radio as he watched the A-10 disappear into a canyon that provided natural concealment from ground-based radar systems. Captain Mitchell was equally stunned by what she had witnessed. Viper Lead. That pilot just used terrain masking techniques that are classified above our clearance level. How does an unauthorized pilot know those procedures? Rodriguez was beginning to understand that they weren't dealing with a routine security breach, or even an experienced pilot flying without authorization. They were observing tactical capabilities that suggested the pilot had access to some of the most classified flight techniques used by the Air Force's most elite units. Nellis Control Viper Lead, Rodriguez reported. The aircraft has used advanced tactical procedures to evade intercept and has disappeared into terrain that provides radar masking. We're going to need specialized support to continue pursuit. Colonel Patterson's response reflected the gravity of the situation and the resources that were being mobilized to respond to what was now being treated as a major security incident. Viper Lead. Specialized units are being scrambled to assist with intercept operations. Continue visual search and report any contact with the aircraft. Do not attempt engagement without specific authorization from higher authority. Over the next 30 minutes, As additional aircraft joined the search and ground-based security forces were mobilized throughout the Nevada test and training range, Rodriguez and Mitchell conducted a systematic search of the area where the A-10 had disappeared. But the aircraft seemed to have vanished completely, despite the fact that the restricted airspace was covered by some of the most sophisticated radar and surveillance systems in the world. "This doesn't make sense," Rodriguez said to Mitchell over their private communication channel. "An A-10 can't just disappear from this much surveillance coverage. Where the hell did it go?" The answer came 20 minutes later, when ground controllers at a classified facility reported that an A-10 Thunderbolt had landed at a remote airstrip that was used for the most sensitive aircraft testing operations. The aircraft had approached the field using flight paths and procedures that were known only to pilots with the highest security clearances, and it had landed without radio communication or prior authorization. "All units, this is Nellis Control," came the announcement that brought the aerial search to an end. "The aircraft has been located and is secure at a classified facility. All search aircraft returned to base for debriefing." Rodriguez and Mitchell were ordered to land at Nellis immediately and report to the base commander's office for what they were told would be a comprehensive debriefing about the incident they had witnessed. But what they found when they landed was not a routine debriefing about a security incident. Instead, they were met by a team of officers whose security clearances and authority extended far beyond anything in Rodriguez's experience. The debriefing was conducted in a classified facility on Nellis Air Force Base that Rodriguez had never seen before, despite his years of assignment to the base. The officers conducting the debriefing wore no identifying insignia and asked questions that demonstrated detailed knowledge of classified aircraft operations and pilot capabilities. "Captain Rodriguez," the senior officer began, "what you witnessed today involves aircraft and personnel that are classified at levels that exceed your current clearance. What I'm about to tell you is classified top secret and must not be discussed with anyone who is not specifically authorized to receive this information." Rodriguez and Mitchell sat in silence as the officer continued his briefing, understanding that they were about to learn information that would fundamentally change their understanding of what they had witnessed. "The aircraft you intercepted today, tail number 78-0691, is assigned to a classified program that conducts operations so sensitive that their existence is not acknowledged in official channels. The pilot of that aircraft is Captain Linda Hayes, and contrary to official records, Captain Hayes is very much alive and continues to conduct missions that are vital to national security." Rodriguez felt his world shift as he processed what he was being told. Captain Linda Hayes was supposed to have been killed in action in 1997, and her death was one of the most classified incidents in Air Force history. "Sir," Rodriguez asked carefully, "if Captain Hayes is alive and continues to conduct classified missions, why are official records still showing her as killed in action?" The senior officer was quiet for a moment before responding, clearly considering how much classified information he could reveal to pilots who hadn't been briefed on the most sensitive operations conducted by the Air Force. Captain Hayes' official death was part of operational security measures designed to protect a classified program that requires personnel to operate without official acknowledgement or support. Her continued operations are so sensitive that even her existence must be protected through official channels. Mitchell leaned forward, clearly struggling to understand the implications of what they were being told. "Sir, are you saying that Captain Hayes has been conducting classified missions for years while officially being listed as killed in action?" "Captain Mitchell, that's exactly what I'm saying. And what you witnessed today was Captain Hayes returning from a mission that has strategic implications for national security." The senior officer pulled out a classified folder and showed Rodriguez and Mitchell photographs and documents that provided evidence of aircraft and operations that they had never imagined existed. The program that Captain Hayes is assigned operates aircraft and conducts missions that push the boundaries of what's possible in military aviation. Today's incident occurred because Captain Hayes was returning from a mission that required her to use capabilities and procedures that are not available to conventional Air Force units. Rodriguez was studying the classified documents, recognizing aircraft modifications and operational procedures that seemed to exceed anything he had learned during his years of military aviation training. "Sir, the tactical procedures we observed, the terrain masking, the radar evasion techniques, those aren't in any training manual I've ever seen. How does Captain Hayes have access to those capabilities? The senior officer smiled slightly, as if he had been expecting the question. Captain Rodriguez, the capabilities you observe represent the cutting edge of tactical aviation development. Captain Hayes has access to training and equipment that are years ahead of what's available to conventional units. Mitchell was also studying the classified materials, recognizing that they were being shown evidence of military capabilities that exceeded anything she had imagined possible. Sir, if these capabilities exist, why aren't they being integrated into normal Air Force operations? Captain Mitchell, the capabilities you witness today are so advanced and so sensitive that they can only be used by specially selected personnel operating under the most classified conditions. Integration into normal operations would compromise security and reveal capabilities that provide strategic advantages as long as they remain secret. The senior officer was beginning to provide Rodriguez and Mitchell with a comprehensive briefing on classified programs that they had never known existed, but he was also preparing them for security responsibilities that came with knowledge of such sensitive information. Captains, what you've learned today makes you part of a very small group of people who are aware of these classified capabilities. Your knowledge of this information comes with responsibilities that will affect the rest of your military careers. Rodriguez was beginning to understand that witnessing the incident with Captain Hayes and her A-10 had fundamentally changed his relationship with the Air Force and his understanding of military aviation capabilities. Sir, what kind of responsibilities are we talking about? Captain Rodriguez, you're talking about security responsibilities that include never discussing what you've learned with anyone who isn't specifically clear for this information, and being available for additional briefings and assignments that may be related to the classified programs you've been exposed to. The senior officer was also evaluating Rodriguez and Mitchell for their suitability for assignments that would involve working with the classified programs they had learned about. Captains, your performance during today's incident demonstrated professional competence and security awareness that may qualify you for assignments involving classified capabilities. Would you be interested in learning more about opportunities to work with advanced programs? Rodriguez and Mitchell exchanged glances, understanding that they were being offered opportunities that could reshape their military careers, while also accepting responsibilities that would affect their lives in ways they couldn't fully anticipate. Sir, Rodriguez said, we're interested in learning more about these opportunities. 6 months later, Captain Michael Rodriguez was assigned to a classified squadron that operated aircraft and conducted missions that officially didn't exist. His experience intercepting Captain Linda Hayes and her legendary A-10 had led to a selection for a program that pushed the boundaries of what was possible in military aviation. Captain Sarah Mitchell had also been assigned to classified operations, working as a test pilot for aircraft that represented the cutting edge of Air Force technology development. Her performance during the incident with Captain Hayes had demonstrated the kind of professional competence and security awareness that was required for the most sensitive assignments in military aviation. But perhaps most significantly, both pilots had learned that the Air Force's most important capabilities were often the ones that remained hidden from public view, operated by personnel whose skills and dedication exceeded what most people imagined possible. Captain Linda Hayes continued to conduct missions that were so classified that her existence was officially denied, flying aircraft that represented the pinnacle of tactical aviation development, while gathering intelligence and conducting operations that protected national security in ways that the public would never know about. The A-10 Thunderbolt with tail number 78-0691 had returned to service after the incident, but it was now operated under even more stringent security protocols that ensure its missions remain invisible to anyone without the highest security clearances. The incident over Nevada had been just one example of the kind of operations that were conducted regularly by personnel whose skills and dedication exceeded what conventional military training could produce, proving that the Air Force's most valuable assets were often the ones that remained hidden until circumstances required them to surface. And somewhere in the skies over restricted airspace, pilots with capabilities that pushed the boundaries of what was possible in military aviation continued to conduct missions that officially never happened, protecting national security while operating aircraft that represented the future of tactical aviation development. The tail number 78-0691 had become a symbol of capabilities that exceeded what most people imagined possible. Flown by a pilot whose skills had been forged in combat operations that were too classified to acknowledge, demonstrating that the most effective military aviation capabilities were often the ones that remained invisible until the moment they were needed most. 3 years after the incident over Nevada, the advanced tactical procedures that Captain Linda Hayes had demonstrated during her intercept by F-16 pilots were being incorporated into training programs for the Air Force's most elite units. Her techniques for terrain masking, radar evasion, and tactical maneuvering have been analyzed and developed into capabilities that enhance the effectiveness of special operations aircraft worldwide. Colonel Linda Hayes, now serving as a commander of a classified squadron that officially didn't exist, continued to push the boundaries of what was possible in tactical aviation while training the next generation of pilots who would carry forward her innovations. The aircraft development programs that she had been testing during her classified missions had produced modifications and capabilities that were years ahead of what was available to conventional Air Force units, providing American forces with tactical advantages that remain invisible to potential adversaries. Captain Rodriguez and Captain Mitchell, now Major Rodriguez and Major Mitchell, had become part of the classified community that operated these advanced capabilities, conducting missions that officially never happened while contributing to the development of aviation technologies that would influence military operations for decades to come. The restricted airspace over Nevada continued to be used for testing and development of the most advanced aircraft and tactics in the world. But now everyone who worked in those areas understood that some of the most important capabilities were the ones that remained hidden until circumstances required them to surface. The A-10 Thunderbolt II remained one of the most beloved aircraft in the Air Force inventory, but the most advanced examples of the aircraft operated under classification levels that made them invisible to anyone without the highest security clearances. These aircraft represented capabilities that exceeded what most people imagined possible, flown by pilots whose skills have been developed through years of the most dangerous and sensitive missions in military aviation. The incident that had begun with a routine intercept of an unauthorized aircraft had become the foundation for understanding that the Air Force's most valuable assets were often the ones that operated in complete secrecy, protecting national security through capabilities that pushed the boundaries of what was possible in military aviation. But perhaps most importantly, the story of Captain Linda Hayes and her legendary A-10 had demonstrated that the most effective military aviation capabilities often came from personnel who combined exceptional flying skills with the kind of dedication and sacrifice that was required to operate in complete secrecy for years at a time. The tale number 78-0691 continued to inspire stories and legends throughout the Air Force community, but the most important aspect of its legacy was a recognition that military aviation's most advanced capabilities were often the ones that remained hidden until the moment they were needed to protect national security and the people who served in defense of their country. Because sometimes the aircraft that appears to be flying without authorization is actually returning from a mission that officially never happened. Sometimes, the pilot who seems to have impossible skills has been developing those capabilities through years of the most classified and dangerous operations in military aviation. And sometimes, the most advanced military aviation capabilities are demonstrated by people whose existence is officially denied, but whose contributions to national security exceed what most people could ever imagine.